Good morning, everybody. We're all familiar with the phrase machine-style politics, and that often does not have a positive connotation. But it was on this date, May 12, 1789, that a social group formed in New York City called the Tammany Society. And this leads to the phrase Tammany Hall, which for a long, long time stood for not only political organization, but political corruption. When the revolution ended in 1783, many social groups sprang up all over the country. One of the most famous ones was the Society of the Cincinnati, and this is their symbol. This consisted of officers of the Continental Army, including George Washington. So it was kind of an elite group, but there were social groups for all levels of society, and ours is the Society of St. Tammany. Now on the left of the left coin is the Indian chief Tammany. That's where Tammany comes from. And he was a chief of the Lenape tribe, and this map shows where the Lenape Indians lived. It was basically the New York City area and others. So that's where Tammany comes from, Chief Tammany. Soon after the country got started, divisions began between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And many of these social groups lined up with one or the other, so they became political. For instance, here's two political opponents. Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton had their duel in 1804. But Aaron Burr belonged to the Tammany Society, as did Martin Van Buren, who was president in the late 1830s. And he was an old New Yorker, and the Tammany Society was associated with New York City. There was a real Tammany Hall. It was a building, and people met there for social get-togethers first, but it soon became political. But that wasn't its original goal, but that's what happened. And eventually it became associated with the Irish. So here's a picture of Irish immigrants. The Irish weren't part of the Tammany Society at first, but later on it became quite Irish, and that's what many people associate it with. So New York City politics was organized by wards, and where the Tammany Hall people were really good was at organizing the ward bosses, and they controlled the political favors and the political patronage. In the 1830s and 40s, the gangs of New York became really important. They tended to be ethnic, and they were quite powerful, and it was this man, Mayor Wood, in the 1850s, who started using the gangs to pursue various political goals. So while the Tammany Society had its political corruption before, it really got ratcheted up in the 1850s. And it reached its height in the 1860s and 70s with Boss Tweed. Now, he was not mayor of New York City, but he sat on many committees, many commissions. He was actually in the House of Representatives, and he was a real criminal. The hundreds of millions of dollars he stole from New York City is amazing. Here's a picture of him with a dollar sign for a face. Here's another cartoon by Thomas Nast, all these guilty people pointing at each other, but they all end up pointing at Boss Tweed. Here's another Thomas Nast cartoon of Boss Tweed as a vulture, ready to, devour the American people. And even in jail, where he was when he died in his mid-50s, Thomas Nast had a caricature of him. So the Tweed, or the Tammany Society, really begins to fade during the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, pictured here. FDR, was a big New Yorker, and he knew New York City politics. And the mayor of New York during the war was Mr. LaGuardia, and he also was not a big fan of Tammany Hall. So when World War II was over and into the 1950s, the whole Tammany thing really started to fade. Now the Tammany Hall building is still there. It's been rehabbed. It's got a cool new roof. Was completely gutted and made into mixed use and office, but it's still there across from Union Park, so check it out sometime. So we love to think about this part of democracy, don't we? The freedoms we have, but let's keep an eye out for those who would benefit at the public expense.